All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and ask that folks just mute themselves for the sake of the info session because we'll be recording this so that we can post it online. But then at the end, we will have time for Q&A. So if folks have any questions, please feel free to hold your questions until the end. And if you have to leave early for any reason, feel free to put it in the chat. And my colleague Annie, who is with us today, will go ahead. She'll man the chat. So I'm joined by my colleagues Annie and Andrew, who are here. That will just kind of help with logistics and such. But it's wonderful to have you all here today.
Welcome, everyone.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and dive in. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining the call for today. We're super excited to just share more about this project, and I think we're excited to see what folks are thinking about, what ideas they have, and also just to see it's always an exciting time when we get to review applications for projects like this. So thank you for joining us. And again, today's info session is just going to give an overview and cover the project, the process of it, how it came to be, and what we're looking for out of the project. So again, super excited to have you all here today. A couple of housekeeping things for folks that have just joined. We ask that everyone just be on mute for this info session, for this portion of it, since we'll be recording so that we can share it online. But then also, if you have any questions, please feel free to hold those questions until the end, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. It should not take me an hour to go through this slide deck. I think this will likely take more like 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So again, thanks everyone for being here. So to provide just a bit of background context on Van Alen, so we're a 130-year-old design nonprofit that creates more equitable cities through community-led inclusive design. And I think some of you might be familiar with Van Alen's history. We started out as an architectural society and have evolved over the course of the past 130 years. But we've built a really robust network of designers, architects, urban planners, artists that we've worked with and collaborated with. And I think around 2020 is when our mission shifted to really think about how could we leverage that really brilliant and beautiful network to be able to support the work that people were doing on the ground in their communities across New York City. And then a bit on the program Common Build Gowanus and how exactly it came to be. So to provide a little bit of background context on Gowanus, I think some of you may be familiar with the rezoning of the neighborhood, that it was the largest rezoning of the de Blasio administration that passed in 2021. And I think even prior to that, when we moved to Gowanus in 2020, something our director of programs did, Andrew Brown, was really just have conversations with folks in the neighborhood about what mattered to them, what was going on in Gowanus, what did people care about, and really thinking about us as a design nonprofit, how could we be good neighbors here with like moving to the neighborhood? And something that was top of mind for so many people was the rezoning, the potential of there being a rezoning. And then, of course, we know that rezoning was passed. And there was a lot of community organizing also around residents of Gowanus really wanting to be able to advocate for themselves and advocate for their communities, for long-standing residents, folks that have been here for a long time, and thinking about how could the rezoning benefit them in any way, shape, or form. So with that rezoning came the 26 points of, or oh, not the 26, is that right? 56 points of agreement. So that's what's unique about the rezoning that took place in Gowanus and the redevelopment that's happening in the neighborhood, is that City Council also passed 56 points of agreement, and those 56 points of agreement were a direct result of a lot of organizing in the neighborhood and the community of people wanting to see things change in this neighborhood to benefit long-term residents. So those 56 points range from everything from canal cleanup to a lot of parks in the neighborhood are slated to be renovated. A lot of money went to Gowanus houses and Wyckoff Gardens, which is our public housing in the neighborhood, and also thinking about flood infrastructure. So there's just been a lot of community engagement, community organizing around the redevelopment and rezoning of the neighborhood. And I think something that we heard from there's an oversight task force that is responsible for also checking in and having quarterly meetings with the city agencies to touch base on their progress on these different points of agreement. And something that that oversight task force and other community members shared with us was this interest in, how could we leverage the network that we know of designers, artists, planners, to really create visual tools or use design in an intentional way to just share out like what's going on and to create intentional projects that connect directly to the redevelopment of the neighborhood in some way, shape, or form. So each year, a designer is selected to create a public art and design installation that is responsive to the rapidly changing landscape of Gowanus in the midst of significant neighborhood redevelopment. This program provides emerging artists, designers, and collectives with tactical support, activating public space, connections with community members, and access to our rich network of design professionals. And this is just a photo of this year's project, which is the Dear Neighbor project by Tiffany Baker. And that project was really focused on flooding in the neighborhood. So to get into the project overview and goals of the project, so we're inviting emerging artists and designers to propose a catalytic lighting installation that serves as a gateway to the neighborhood, activating underutilized public space, increasing foot traffic to small business commercial corridors, and reinforcing a growing wayfinding network that connects people to local businesses. The proposed project should strengthen the area's visual identity and reflect a shared vision for a more connected, welcoming, and economically resilient Gowanus. We know that the word gateway is in here, but we're not asking folks to literally just propose an arch and be like, boom, it's an arch that's lit up. And that's like what we want it to be. That is not what we're looking for here, but we're really looking for just different creative ways to activate that commercial corridor and to kind of signal to people that they're entering a place where there's a lot of small businesses as kind of an entry point to Gowanus and to the neighborhood. I think Gowanus is just so unique and it's also kind of uniquely shaped that there's not really a key central point or focal point in the neighborhood. And we're really thinking about how can we activate those small business corridors along Third Avenue, along Fourth Avenue, and really just draw some attention to them. I think something that is unique about the neighborhood, and maybe not unique to Gowanus, but in any neighborhood where there's a lot of construction going on, is in the midst of this redevelopment, there's just so much construction and so many buildings that are going up. There's so many things that have changed in the neighborhood with the shift from um, the industrial zoning to residential and mixed use, that we have a lot of folks that will be moving into the neighborhood, a lot of construction, and some of those small businesses, might be kind of like hidden behind construction right now or aren't necessarily as visible as they used to be in the neighborhood. So how can a lighting installation be used to draw attention to those small business corridors in Gowanus? And then some criteria and parameters that we'll be asking for folks to keep in mind. So again, we're looking for a site-specific, highly visible temporary lighting installation with a strong visual presence, responding to the local need for increased foot traffic, transform a key gateway slash entry point of the neighborhood into a bold visual anchor for the district's emerging wayfinding strategy. Go Walkabout, created by Arts Gowanus and the Gowanus Canal Conservancy. So a quick note there. Go Walkabout is essentially an effort created by Arts Gowanus and the Canal Conservancy to really help have a wayfinding scheme and like plan for Gowanus to help direct folks to the small businesses that are in the neighborhood. We want the project to reflect the neighborhood's unique character, connect residents and newcomers with the small business corridors of Gowanus, enhance a sense of safety after dark. And we're looking for something that is structurally sound and safe, durable, and uses sustainable materials, and then also uses the available funds resourcefully and can be completed within the allotted time frame. One flag here, although it's a temporary lighting installation, we are ideally looking for a project that's able to be up for, I think, at least 8, but ideally up for 11 months. So just something to keep in mind with the durability of material there is that it's something that's going to be up through the fall, through the winter, as the seasons change, which is just something that's nice to keep in mind if you're thinking about materiality at all down the line. And then the open call will be open through August 19th. Again, we're looking for designers and artists to have at least 2 years of professional experience, and also having completed at least one public facing and or community engaged project with a practice based in New York City. I think something that's important to us is just that the designer be available to have meetings in person, but also able to engage with the community, with small businesses that might want to be involved or know more about the project. And if anyone has specific questions questions for me. Of course, we'll have time for Q&A at the end here, but I'll also be having office hours on August 6th and August 12th from 3 to 6. My email is at the end of this presentation, but you can also feel free to email me at any time, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. And then a bit about the project award. So again, we're just at the open call stage right now where we're just looking for who's interested in the project and what ideas they might have. From there, a selection committee will select 3 finalists to invite to submit a proposal. So they will receive an RFP. Those finalists, upon submission of their proposals, will receive $2,000. Something that's really important to us here at Van Allen is that we try to be as equitable as possible with our artist fees and design fees. So we want to make sure that folks are paid for their work and for those proposals. And then from those 3 proposals, that selection committee will reconvene to select a winning project. For that winning project, the designer will receive $23,000 fee for development and delivery of the project, and then will be awarded $75,000 for direct expenses of the project's production, fabrication, and installation. And then just to give an idea of who is involved on the selection committee, this is a previous year's selection committee. This year's selection committee will similarly consist of local stakeholders and Gowanus residents, but I think something that's really important to us is just that the stakeholders here in the neighborhood have a say and play a role in what is coming and what will be taking shape and taking place in the neighborhood. And then for the winning designer that's selected, just a note on some of the support that they'll be receiving from Van Allen. So the selected designer will receive the following to help them successfully launch and program their installation: access to Van Allen's office in Gowanus for public programming, community outreach, and meeting space. So we're at 303 Bond, and we have a storefront space that's really wonderful and beautiful and gets a lot of light. So usually a lot of the public programming that connects to the installation is typically hosted here in our office, or in other places throughout the neighborhood, but this space is available and welcome for that public programming, but also as a meeting space for the designer. If the designer wants to connect with folks in the neighborhood or have conversations with people, or even just needs to take calls from our office, they are more than welcome to come in and use our office space in that way. You'll be receiving support directly from me and help with navigating the permitting process and also building relationships with city agencies as needed. I realize I forgot to say this. My name is Shaloa Coley. I'm a program manager here at Van Allen. I've been here for 2.5 years now, and I manage our Common Build program along with a couple of other projects and things that connect to Gowanus in the neighborhood. But yeah, I'm kind of your point person that you're probably going to get tired of hearing from in regards to this project. And I also know my voice is a little gnarly today, so thanks for hanging in there with me as I talk through all of this. And in addition to that, we also have relationships with design professionals in our robust network. So from other architects to other designers to engineers, if there's support that you need, if there's advice that you want, we're happy to help make those connections with other folks in our network. And then also, again, those connections with the local stakeholders and Gowanus residents, whether it be for input or if you're thinking about site selection in different locations. We ultimately want, that's a good note on site selection. We want the designer to ultimately decide the site of the installation or to propose the site. We'll have some recommendations that will be included in the RFP that's sent out to those 3 finalists. But it's ultimately up to the designer to decide what site they want to propose for the installation. But we can also help with just having conversations again with the different city agencies that are in control of different spots in the neighborhood, but then also outreach to some of those private businesses or entities in the neighborhood as well. And then the timeline for the project. So in early September, that invitation will be sent to 3 finalists to submit a proposal, and then they'll have about a month to work on their proposals, and those proposals will be due in early October. From there, we hope to have a selection made by mid to late October, and then working on the contract. And then late October through March 2026 will be production and fabrication of the project, with the project launching in March of 2026 and then de-installed in February of 2027. And now's the time that we have for questions. And of course, my contact information is here if anyone has questions that they want to reach out to me directly with. But yeah, other than that, we've got time for questions. We actually have plenty of time for questions. So if I guess we can do this a couple different ways. If folks want to, you can either put your question in the chat and like me and Annie will kind of man the chat there. Or if folks want to just kind of dive in and like come off mute or raise their hand with any questions, please feel free to do so.
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
You have a point about NYC-based artists and designers. I'm wondering if the firm is based elsewhere, but they have designers based in NYC. Is that eligible?
Yes, yeah, that's fine. I think as long as there's team members that are based in New York City, that works.
That works. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
All right, I'm going to stretch the geography a little bit. What if so our studio is not based in the New York City area. However, we do have some of our studio members next to New York City, but they're technically in New Jersey. Does that count? Or is
Yeah,
that
so
sort of not really?
So we usually think about the metropolitan area, including that kind of like tri-state area. So that
Okay.
would count. Yeah.
Okay, good. She's super close, but not quite over the water. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry that if you mentioned that before, but are we going to be responsible for the permits to request the permits?
So that is something that we will work on collaboratively. So I will be supporting any designer with the permitting process. So in going through the agencies, whether it be through parks, DOT, whomever it might be that's in control of it. I feel like at this point, most of it is DOT or parks. I will support on that permitting process. So it looks pretty collaborative. The artist will be responsible for kind of selecting what site they want to activate or sites if it's multiple sites. And then from there, I'll support with the permitting process and making those connections with the city agencies and helping with the filing of that paperwork.
Thank you.
Of course.
I have a quick question. You go first, whoever that was.
I was just going to flag, Shaloa, there are a couple of questions in the chat about like particular spots or areas in Gowanus, if it's possible to do a multi like site project, and if there are maps or specific site information. Um, so do you want to talk a little bit about site selection?
Yeah, I can talk about site selection a bit. So again, we will be for the designers that are invited to submit a proposal, there will be a list of a couple of locations that we have in mind that we think might be well suited for the project, but we are also open to what the designer would propose for the installation. Projects can be multi-site. They don't just have to be single site. There's one thing that I will just ask folks to keep in mind with multiple sites is with multiple sites, there can also come multiple agencies involved in permitting or multiple different private entities involved in the project. So I think it's just something that's good to keep in mind when you're thinking about potentially doing a multi-site project. It's just who are the stakeholders, who's involved, and who owns the site. I think something that just some advice that I can share, I think from previous designers and artists we've worked with is while we're happy to help with the permitting process, and there's some agencies that are very easy to work with, for example, Parks. Parks is fantastic to work with. There's other agencies where there can be a lot more hurdles or it can be a bit more difficult. So I'd ask you to just keep in mind thinking about different private properties in the neighborhood where you think the owner might be amenable or interested in hosting the project in some way, shape, or form. I think there have been circumstances where for the first year that we did this program, the designers were there were 11 or 12 different sites in the neighborhood they were looking to activate through DOT. And there were just a lot of hiccups with some of the permitting there. And the designers actually pivoted from going through DOT for that permitting to going to private entities. And they got great responses from grocery stores, bodegas, a bunch of different folks that were like, yeah, we're more than happy to kind of like host the project they were smaller installations, but on the sidewalk in front of their stores. So yeah, I would just encourage folks to keep that in mind when it comes to site selection. And then when it comes to a map, I think I don't have a specific map, but I would look at a map of Gowanus along 3rd and 4th Avenue. But any place where you see clusters of like small businesses, I'd say are really the areas that we want to target, but especially 3rd and 4th Ave most likely is what we're looking at is I think are probably the highest density collection of small businesses in the neighborhood.
I will also flag on the map question that the Go Walkabout has a map component, so that might also be a good place to start when you're just trying to visualize the neighborhood a little bit. And Shaloa, there's also a question in the chat about main considerations for selecting artists. Is it experience or proposal? What exactly are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that something that we are looking for with the open call is designers and artists that are kind of in that category of emerging to mid-career, but like really with a focus and emphasis on emerging, just so that this is a project and a process and a program where we really want to be able to support the trajectory of someone's career. And we hope that this is kind of like a bit of a breakthrough moment for them. So we're looking at that, but then we're also looking for some sort of experience doing a public facing or community engaged project. So I'd say what we're looking at and what's super helpful when we look at the application is when you have the option to list those 3 previous projects you've worked on that you think connect to this project in some way, shape, or form, or just are examples of your work or your practice in some integral way, being able to see photos of that and also like descriptions of the project and your role in it. I think those are super helpful for helping us decide who's most well suited for this project. And yeah, I think that, so I think for the open call stage, it's kind of like being in that emerging to mid-career range, and then also just seeing some of your past work. When it comes to the actual proposal and submitting of the proposal, I think there will be another kind of like info session for the folks that are invited to submit and to actually submit a proposal for the installation. But I think we're really looking for like a breadth of like creative ideas that also feel specific to Gowanus. I think something that's important with this project is that it be something, a lighting installation that is site specific, and something that is just unique to the neighborhood. And yeah, it just feels very intentional. I think that's something that the selection committee often looks for, is something that feels intentional for the neighborhood.
We got a question from Pedro Cruz.
Hey y'all. I just wanted to know if maybe if you could clarify if there's any expectations around the form or the function aside from lighting, like hosting types of programming or specific architectural spatial elements, or even like branding and integration with the Go Walkabout program. And if there's also like any past constraints that you've seen from other projects that we should also kind of plan for in the design.
Yeah, I think that, and Andrew, feel free to chime in here if you'd like to, but I think we're pretty form agnostic to a certain extent, and that yes, it has to be a lighting installation, but there's no specific parameters around what the structure should look like or what the structure should be or how it's going to be activated. I think that we love to see projects where either they can kind of like stand alone and operate on their own, or if there's some sort of public programming element that the artist really wants to layer on top of the installation, I think that's great as well. But we really ultimately leave it up to the designer and their proposal. So there's kind of a lot of freedom and wiggle room there. And I guess, Andrew, is there anything else that you want to say to that?
No, I'm just saying, like on programming, we're pretty open to what the possibilities could be, and we really encourage designers to be pretty creative with that. And I think for the designers who are invited once proposals get presented to the selection committee, what we've seen in the past couple of years is that the selection committee will start cooking up some like provisional programmatic ideas based on what they're seeing. And then we ask designers to be open to like, maybe taking some of those ideas on. But at this stage of the game, we're really open to just people being creative and thinking about like what feels like an appropriate response. What I also say is on the structural side of things, if you are thinking about something that's kind of like a structural architectural installation, you definitely want something that's durable. It can withstand the elements, be outside for up to like 10 months at a time with minimal maintenance intervention, just in the interest of like the artist, but like everybody involved. Something that has like a significant presence. As far as the lighting component is concerned, we like something that has a significant presence at day and night, right? So obviously, like at nighttime, you want to have like a beautiful effect when it's lit up, but you don't want it to kind of look like a insignificant structure in the daytime, so because the lighting is either not on or it's not visible, right? So those are like the main high level considerations.
And just to add to that, Andrew already touched on this, but when it comes to the programming component, like he said, I think oftentimes we see the selection committee kind of start to cook up sometimes ideas as they're reviewing the proposals. But I think it's nice when there's a proposal that's like open enough that there's kind of like that option of kind of like programming being layered onto it or not. And yeah, I think we're ultimately looking for designers that are kind of like willing to collaborate after they're like selected with the community and with organizations and small businesses that are here on that element of things.
I have a quick question about past projects and credentials. So if we have, let's say, 2 relevant projects, but we have worked in other studios that also kind of fill that category, that bucket, would you recommend showing that other work, or just keeping it to work that we've done in our own studio, authored by us?
I think that if it feels applicable, I would encourage you to include it. So like even if it's not just from your specific practice, but work you've done alongside another studio or with another studio. And I think there's definitely space for you to kind of like flag that and even like make a note of like what your role was in the project and like, why you feel that it connects. I think we would definitely welcome being able to see that.
Great, thank you.
There was also a question about Go Walkabout that I wanted to answer because I know someone asked about the Go Walkabout component, if it needed to be cohesive with that. I think that for the sake of this program and project, it does not need to follow any aesthetic criteria that goes along with Go Walkabout. I think Go Walkabout is just this emerging wayfinding strategy in the neighborhood, and we want it to be something that can potentially connect or direct people to the different small businesses in the neighborhood, but there's no aesthetic criteria there in regards to it kind of like influencing the form or the color scheme of the installation in any way.
Shaloa, we have 2 more questions a little bit more than 2 more questions in the chat. Is there any consideration given to Gowanus-based designers?
Yeah, so we are especially encouraging Gowanus-based designers to apply. So that's something that we keep in mind as well. While it's open to New York City, the tri-state metropolitan area, we definitely want, we know that Gowanus has such a rich base of artists and designers here. So we're also definitely encouraging Gowanus-based artists and designers to apply.
And how many applications are you expecting versus the be shortlisted?
I think so. Last year was actually our first year doing an open call for this program, and we received just over 100. And we're aware the fee is a bit more generous this year. That's the money being allotted towards the project. So I think we're expecting and anticipating that it will likely be over 100 applications.
And then also in the chat, they ask about how Van Allen defines emerging and how strict the definition is to qualify.
Yeah, I think That's a great question. When it comes to emerging, because I know sometimes there's folks that are full-time designers, full-time artists, and have been full-time practicing for the past 20 years. And then there are also folks that might have other jobs and like design is kind of like their side hustle or side gig. So I want to say, and I know this isn't probably the answer that anyone wants to hear, but it's a bit of a case-by-case basis in the sense that we ask folks to upload their CV. We'll also be asking folks to kind of, there's a question in the open call questionnaire where it asks just like how many years you've been practicing. So I think that's something that we look at just in regards to like how many years you've been practicing as a designer and artist, and then also just like what your CV looks like. So yeah, it's not like if you've been designer for more than 5 years, don't apply for this. Like that is not what we mean here by emerging to mid-career. I think we're probably looking at something more around, if someone's been practicing for over 12, over 15 years, but maybe if they haven't had an opportunity to do a public art project in this kind of way or a public design project in this way, and it would be new for them to do something like this, then I think we would want to consider them and we would want to look at their work. So I think there's a couple of different things at play when we're looking at the term emerging.
And I would say if folks have more specific questions on that, they could reach out to you directly, right, Shaloa?
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes.
Sorry, just wanted to ask a question about the review process, because it's like if you got 100 applications, how do you sort of go through 100, and what are some more specific items that you're looking at? Because it's not like a design competition where you actually have visuals or can see that a proposal.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to that, what we will be looking at, well, let me talk about the process a bit. Essentially, once we receive um, everyone's kind of like submission to apply, we as a staff kind of like narrow it down to a top, let's say, depending on how many people apply, like 10 to 15 people. And then those 10 to 15 we put in front of the selection committee. And the selection committee will take a look at those designers, their CVs, their bios, kind of previous projects they've worked on, and then they will narrow it down to a top three. And then those top three will be invited to submit proposals. Once those proposals are submitted, there's a quick feasibility review process where we usually ask an engineer and fabricator to take a look at the project to just make sure it's feasible to be done within the project. Then they'll provide recommendations to the selection committee just for them to keep in mind and some notes in regards to like what they think is feasible and what's not feasible. Then the selection committee will make a final decision. So that's a bit on like what the overall process looks like. In regards to what we're looking for, since we don't have of these 100 plus that apply, we don't have drawings of what exactly they would be proposing. I think we're really just looking at backgrounds in regards to like what have folks been doing, what have they been working on. And I think this is where it's so important for us to be able to see those like 3 examples of previous projects that you think make you a good candidate for this project. So I'd say that's really important. And then we also just added an optional feature this year. Again, we always want to be mindful of people's time, but where there's the option to kind of propose a bit of like a concept or like some ideas around what they're thinking in terms of how they would want to activate space or what they would propose. And there's also the option to submit like sketches and really truly like napkin sketches or even like a collage of what you have in mind. I would encourage folks, like if this project is something you're really interested in taking on, and if you have the time and capacity to submit and like take the time to kind of fill out that portion of the application, because again, it's just going to help folks have a more robust idea of who you are and then also like what you want to do and what your ambition is with the project. Of course. I see we have a hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Shlo.
Hello.
Can you share more about the specific desire for both a gateway and lighting on this call?
Yeah, I think that let me see if it'll let me click back. Let me do that. So in terms of the gateway and lighting kind of component of it, I think what we're really looking for is a creative lighting installation that's activating some sort of kind of like entry point, or it can be multiple entry points, or even just like multiple places along the commercial corridor that kind of unifies the commercial corridor. So it doesn't have to, again, like we kind of want to get away from the idea of it literally being a gateway or arch that kind of just gets stationed someplace in Gowanus, but really thinking about, I think this project is a good example. This is Point of Action by Studio Cookjohn. That was up in Flatiron and 23rd Street Partnership up on the plaza up there in 2020, where you kind of have these kind of, this is just an example that what you propose does not have to look like this at all, but I think this is a good example of like a lighting installation that has enough visual character and read that it kind of can become like a signature of a neighborhood, of a plaza, or of an area. So I think we're looking for something that is distinct and site specific, but also, again, something that's going to activate that commercial corridor. So I guess this also gets at the question of whether it be single site or multi-site. Again, we leave that up to the designer in terms of thinking about how you want to navigate, if you want to navigate proposing. And again, this would be down the line, but proposing activating a single site, or if you want to activate multiple sites. But I think this is also a good example of, this is all one site, but there's like the multiple pieces to it. So yeah, does that answer that question?
Yeah, a little bit. I was wondering, like compared to other proposals, you included this to request this year. But yes, this is helpful.
Yeah. Maybe can you ask the question one more time for me? I want to make sure I
Like,
actually
what was the rationale? Like, what thinking was behind, like, oh, we should have lighting, and we should have a gateway.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Some like background context there. So, each year for this program, we've focused on a different topic that connects to the redevelopment of the neighborhood. So the first year that we did this program, the project that was selected was With Your Voice by Juan Carrion and Rodolfo Casulas. And they were really tasked with thinking about how they could broadcast out the 56 points of agreement and just making sure that people were informed on like what was happening in this neighborhood with the redevelopment and what was taking shape here. The second year's selected project was the Dear Neighbor Project, which was focused on flooding in the neighborhood and thinking about, with all these folks moving into the neighborhood, how can you capture the stories of longtime residents of Gowanus and really share out the narratives of how people have been dealing with flooding in the neighborhood in a way that's intentional. So we went from broadcasting out the 56 points of agreement to flooding to now thinking about the small business corridors. And each of those elements connects to the redevelopment of the neighborhood in some way, shape, or form, right? So like with newcomers moving into the neighborhood, how do you make sure people know about these small businesses? How do you support the work of kind of like those long-standing small businesses and draw attention to them in a way that's intentional? And then for this year's project, we also received funding from the New York City Department of Small Business Services. So like there's that added layer of like a commitment to the small businesses in Gowanus. And when you look at the 56 points of agreement, there's also like language around like small businesses and economic development in the neighborhood as well. So I think thinking about how do you kind of like help Gowanus stay tried and true to its history while also welcoming in newcomers and supporting these longstanding businesses that have been there. I think the lighting component is, we have a long history of doing lighting installations. So I think it's nice for Van Alen to go back to doing another lighting installation. We used to activate the plaza at 300 Ashland. Then prior to that, up in Flatiron, we were activating the plaza up there. So I think lighting projects and lighting installations are something we're really familiar with, and it just feels really applicable to, being able to activate a commercial corridor in that way, in the simplest of terms, we think about when it's the holidays and there's the holiday lighting that goes up to kind of like activate and like remind people like, hey, all these small businesses are here. I think we're thinking about something that is along those lines, but is a bit more, although it's not permanent, something with a bit more impact, and something that can kind of activate that commercial corridor for almost a year.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
I have a question. In the following phase of the selection, would Van Allen or the selection board would consider pairing designers together possibly due to maybe a similarity of the proposal or different strength, just to kind of increase collaboration as well as kind of to use the talents of these emerging designers?
Yeah, oh my goodness, that is a great question, and that has actually come up in a many selection committee meetings. So often, when the committee sees three proposals in front of them, they're like, "Oh my goodness, we want some combination of all three of these," and so they want to, kind of like puzzle piece and put things together. And I think what we have found is just with a desire to respect the designer's kind of original idea and what they propose, is we do really ask the committee to narrow down on one proposal that they want to push forward and that they want to move forward with as the winner. And then what we will do is if there's a lot of conversation around a desire for collaboration, whether it be amongst the three finalists or if there's one project that's the winner, but there's a runner-up and they're like, oh, we'd really love for there to be elements of that runner-up project like in that first one. Oftentimes we will select a winner, and then what we will do, if it feels appropriate based on kind of the notes we get from the selection committee, is we will share those notes with the winning designer on their project and also on that desire for collaboration that might have come up from the selection committee. And then we may ask the winning designer, if they're willing or interested in having conversations with the runner-up or with anyone else that was a finalist. So we really like to lead, we don't want to force, we don't want to force marriages between anyone, and we also don't want anyone to feel pressure to collaborate where there may not be a desire to collaborate. So we usually leave it up to, or in all circumstances, we would be leaving it up to whoever's selected as the winner if they're interested in collaborating with any of the other designers.
Thank you so much.
Shiloh, I've got a couple more questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
Is it encouraged to organize with and include other local organizations and initiatives in the research and design process? And would engagement with them be supported through Van Allen's community space resources?
Yes. So the answer to all of that is yes. I think something that is so important to us is that like the community be involved and engaged throughout the project, but also just that we want to support that engagement with the small businesses, with other initiatives that are taking place in Gowanus. So we are always open to collaboration, and we are more than happy to kind of like in that research and design phase, even if it's in the proposal phase where you're kind of like crafting your proposal, if you want to have meetings with anyone from our office or kind of like engage with folks or are interested in connecting with folks, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and I can kind of help make some of those introductions or connections, and then also can make the space or like office space available as needed and as we have available. I think that answers that. If that doesn't answer that question, please let me know.
Sounds good. And is experience working with lighting required?
So experience working with lighting is not required. But what I would say is that if lighting is new or if it's a part of your practice that maybe you haven't explored in this way before, I would really encourage you to reach out to a lighting designer or even like receive advice from a lighting designer or just think intentionally about who you might want to bring on to your team or who you might want to subcontract to support on that lighting component. I think we've done previous projects where designers have been selected who don't have a lot of past experience with lighting, but oftentimes they find that they have to subcontract or contract with a lighting designer to just provide some support on some of the specifics from anything from the actual lighting fixture to some of those like more electrical components of it and figuring out what's feasible there. So that would be what I encourage folks to think about who don't have a background in lighting is to get to at least get advice from someone that has a background in lighting. So yeah, I think something that we will be working on our end is Something that we always like to do is have technical assistance providers who can provide support on the project once a project is selected. And we will be, reaching out to some folks in our network who are lighting designers to potentially be able to provide advice as needed. But again, in this phase of the project and program, I would just encourage you to at least get the advice of a lighting designer, just to know kind of like what's involved in the project.
And one more from the chat. Can we submit developed drawings or renderings in the conceptual part of the application?
Yes, you are more than welcome to in that kind of conceptual part. Like you're welcome to submit anything from sketches to something that is more fully, if you have renderings that you want to share, that is welcome. It's kind of totally up to the designer and what they want to submit there.
And then the final question, can you specify Gowanus commercial corridor? Does that mean 3rd and 4th Avenue, the waterfront, etc.?
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about the commercial corridor, again, we're mainly thinking about 3rd and 4th Avenue. You can also think about, I think the waterfront would be included in that as well, just in the efforts to kind of like revitalize that Gowanus waterfront area. I think those are really the main locations right now. Annie, I know you actually helped with this in terms of thinking about sites. Is there anything else that comes to mind other than 3rd, 4th, and then the waterfront?
Yeah, I mean, I think some other locations we were talking about, and don't take this as gospel in any way, but was up at the north part of the neighborhood that gets a lot of foot traffic, potentially going to Atlantic Terminal. Is there a way to kind of capture that attention? On the south end of the neighborhood, there's the Smith 9th Street stop, which is kind of an unpleasant area that could potentially use some additional lighting. Of course, permitting that might be kind of a hassle because it's MTA property. So when we were sitting and thinking about the neighborhood, those were some spots that came up on our end, but that by no means is like directions that anyone needs to go in. So I'd encourage you to kind of think about, um, potential locations that you would be interested in. I think that can also come at the proposal stage. I think for the concept, it doesn't you don't need to have necessarily specific locations yet if you are, less familiar with the neighborhood. But Shaloa, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's totally correct. Yeah, at this kind of like brief concept stage, if you have a location in mind where you're like, this is the place I want to activate, like you're more than welcome to include it. If you don't have one in mind yet and are kind of spitballing and thinking about different areas of the neighborhood that could potentially be activated, that is totally fine as well.
Yeah, and I just will reiterate what Shaloa said about the concept. We really don't want to be asking artists for, you know, uncompensated proposals. So, if you want to submit a concept, that's great, but it will, you don't need to submit a full proposal at this stage because part of the structure of this is to kind of get everybody's ideas. And then when we ask for a full proposal, we will compensate your time for that.
Yes, to add to that, again, like we're not going to say, we're not going to not look at your concept if we feel like you proposed too much, but we really do want to be mindful and respectful of people's time here. I think in the application, it asks folks not to spend more than an hour on that portion of the application if they choose to submit it. So what I will ask is like, please try to adhere to that, not spending more than an hour on it, just because, again, we want to be mindful of folks' time and we want people to be properly compensated for their work.
And speaking of Shaloa, we have a question around, is there a limited number of ideas that a team can submit?
No, I'd say that there's no limit on when you get to that kind of like concept brief section of the open call, there's no limit on the number that you can submit.
Well, those are all the questions in the chat. I think we, welcome any final questions either in the chat or if folks just want to jump in, that's great as well.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop share. Again, we'll do a final call for questions that anyone has. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions about anything. You can just send me an email. And then there's also those office hours if anyone wants to drop by the office at any point in time. So yeah, looking forward to seeing everyone's applications.
Thanks, everyone.